Here's my report on Judith Ortiz Cofer. She was a writer from Puerto Rico. She was born February 24th, 1952 in Hormigueros, Puerto Rico. She passed away December 30th, 2016 from liver cancer in Louisville, Georgia. Her works include The Line of Sun in 1989, The Latin Deli in 1993, A Love Story beginning in Spanish in 2005, Call Me Maria 2006, The Meaning of Consuelo 2003, Silent Dancing in 1990, as well as many others. She wrote short fiction, poems, novels, and poetry, and long fiction, drama, and children's literature. At the age of 3 or 4, she moved from Puerto Rico to Paterson, New Jersey with her family. Her father was in the Navy, and he was stationed at the Naval Yard in the Bronx, New York. When he would go home or go off on leave, her mother would take her and her brother back home to Puerto Rico, and they would stay months at a time with their grandmothers in Puerto Rico. Her schooling was split between a small public school in Puerto Rico and a Catholic school in Paterson, New Jersey, where they lived in the L building, which was a vertical barrio. She often wrote about the differences in cultures and being from Puerto Rico, and the difficulty and the things she faced being in New Jersey during her time growing up. At the age of 16, her father retired from the Navy, and they moved to Augusta, Georgia. There, she completed high school. She went on to college and graduated from Florida. Where was it? The Florida Atlantic University. She got married her second year of college at 19 to Charles John Cofer, a businessman. She ended up having a daughter by the name of Tanya, and she continued her education at Augusta College and received her BA in 1974, and 3 years later, in 1977, attended Oxford University and received her MA from Florida Atlantic University. Ms. Cofer started off teaching as a bilingual teacher in the public schools of Palm Beach County, Florida, during the 74 and 75 school year. In 78, once she had her master's degree, she moved up to English at Broward Community College in Fort Lauderdale. From there, she was appointed instructor in Spanish at the same institution, and then she went on to be an instructor in English at Palm Beach Community College. In 1984, she went and accepted a position at the Department of English at the University of Georgia as an instructor. The interesting fact that I discovered about Miss Judith is in 1987 to 88, she came the academic year of 87 and 88, she became an instructor for the Georgia Center for Continuing Education. And then the next year, in 88 and 89, she actually was a professor at Macon College. That was a year before I started Macon College, way back. But she was an English teacher here at Macon College for 1 year. And then in 89 and 90, or in 90, she moved on to Mercer, and she was the coordinator of special programs at Mercer for a year or two, and then eventually moved back to University of Georgia, and that's where she retired from. Like I said, she had a husband that was a businessman and a daughter named Tanya, and her daughter eventually gave her a grandson named Eli. Her and her husband had a big farm in Louisville, Georgia, and that was kind of her place to relax at. She had a cabin built there that showed the piney woods of Georgia, she said, but inside she had all her books that made her feel like she had all the places in the world in there with her because of all of the books and the authors that was in that room. Made her feel like she could be anywhere in the world she wanted to be, but she still had the peace and quiet in the pretty woods of Georgia. And she often wrote about that in her works. Another thing that I found extremely interesting about Miss Cofer was the two real big influences in her life. And they were Lillian Hellman and Virginia Woolf. She felt that both these ladies were very strong women and very influential women, and she could relate to them. They stood their ground, and Virginia Woolf especially. Judith didn't want to be the normal Puerto Rican wife or mother that just was obedient and did what her husband asked and never questioned. Her mom was a lot like that. Her mom never adapted to the English ways or the ways in the United States. Her mom was very much against those. Her father wanted her to be more like women in the United States, to be more independent and not be that typical obedient, if you will, wife and mother. She did get a lot of influence from her grandmother and her aunts and the strong women in Puerto Rico. She talked about how they were such strong storytellers, and she just took that storytelling that they gave her and turned it into literature and art. And so she was influenced from both. She got the influence from like the writers, like I said. She said Virginia Woolf was very influential to her, and as strong as woman as she was, and the stand she took. So, and she was, I read some of her colleagues wrote or spoke at her memorial service, and they were published, and they spoke so highly of her and how she always made time for friends. She always made time for students. She always talked to them. I think one of her last public speaking was in 2016, months before she passed away, and she had been sick with liver cancer for over 2 years and fighting it, but she still found the will and courage to go and do that public speaking. And then I found a poem that was very interesting to me, and after reading through a lot of her works, or reading some interviews that people had did on Miss Judith, I really understood this poem, and I think I kind of got the grasp of it. The way my mother walked. She always wore an amulet on a gold chain, an ebony fist, to protect her from the evil eye of envy and the lust of men. She was the gypsy queen of Market Street, shuttling her caramel candy body past the blind window of the Jewish tailor, who did not lift his gaze. The Morse code of her stiletto heels, sending their Mayday, but do not approach into the darkened doorways, were eyes hung like mobiles in the breeze. Alleys made her grasp my hand, teaching me the braille of her anxiety. The 2 flights to our apartment were our holy accession to a sanctuary from strangers, where evil could not follow on its caterpillar feet, and where her needs and her fears could be put away like matching towels on a shelf. In this poem, I feel like she is reflecting on her mother. Like I said, her mother never grasped the way of cultures for the United States. She never learned the language. She only spoke Spanish. And it was very, very important to her mother for her to have a strong Puerto Rican heritage. She did not want her daughter to adapt the United States ways of life and culture where her father did. And I feel like in this poem, that's kind of what this is talking, that her mother had a lot of anxiety, and that when she went out, her beauty made men maybe look at her. That caused her anxiety. She didn't want it, and she stood her ground and walked tall. And then when she got into the safety of her house, she could relax and put her fears away and know that she was safe within her walls of her house. And I felt like maybe that's what her mother felt like while they were home or in the United States. Her father was tragically killed after they moved to Augusta in a car accident. And she said that after her father passed away, her mother moved back to Puerto Rico. So, and it's really funny because in my research, one of her colleagues that became a dear friend of hers at the University of Georgia, they both were professors in 1984 at the University of Georgia, and her colleague talks about they both wore stiletto heels, and they would walk down the hall, Parker Hall, going to their office on the 3rd floor, and the dean would come out in the hall who is making all this noise? And it was them with their stiletto heels. So, with her mom, or her putting this in her poem, I'm sure her mom wore heels. And pictures of Miss Judith, she was absolutely beautiful. So, she probably got her looks from her mom. So, to me, in this poem, the way my mother walked, her mother was probably beautiful. She probably did get a lot of stares and lust from men that was unwanted. So she just wore her gold chain, tried to protect herself from that evil eye, and it caused her anxiety to be out like that. But as soon as she got into the walls of her house, she could relax and let her fears and the evil go away. So that is my report on Miss Judith Ortiz Cofer. I've certainly gained a lot of knowledge of her. And actually, when I get finished with all my schoolwork, I think I would like to read some of her stories, her novel. It's really sparked my interest, and it was really fascinating to see that she actually taught at Macon College when I was there, and at Mercer. So she spent a little bit of time in Macon, so that was really cool, interesting fact for me to learn. That is it.